how you can use it to sort of self-assess and gauge how resilient your organisation might be to the kind of advanced threats currently out there. Briefly describe an example of sort of current generation finance-specific malware, and then lastly sort of touch on our white paper we've written as LogRhythm covering the Financial Conduct Authority's guide for firms, and some of this will be available as collateral after the presentation as well. And as I mentioned, questions can be sort of taken towards the end, so feel free to fire those out on chat as we go. So let's briefly describe the threat landscape and how we sort of currently see it. If you look at the world today, we see a rapidly evolving cyber threat motive, one that's been expanding and will continue to expand. There's political spectrum, governments and nation states using cyber attacks to further their political agenda, for industrial espionage or cyber warfare motives as well. Industrial espionage particularly has been going on for several years with billions in IP stolen from corporations, governments globally. Many kind of news stories there of nation-state sponsored cyber espionage. There's the ideological motive, the likes of Anonymous and LulzSec, who use cyber attacks to affect their ideological agenda. This is something we've seen in the past and we expect to see a lot more of. Lastly, there's the criminal element, and this is the most pervasive today, and perhaps the most important to this audience, relevant to most corporations, and this is rapidly growing. The Rank Corporation projects that cybercrime is more profitable currently than the illicit drug trade, which creates an incredible motivation to use cyber attacks to do bad and reap the financial rewards. What compounds this is that the criminal element is a facilitator or enabler for the other groups, motivated by the political or the ideological means. The cybercrime supply chain makes it much easier to trade in stolen goods and data, but also to tap into resources, to direct botnets, to organise malware, which actually lowers the bar in terms of access to access these cyber weapons for other users. But the root of all these groups is, or the motives of these groups based in criminal activity is especially pertinent for financial institutions, which are often the first target. Where this leaves us in the state, we see an increasing number of incidents and associated risks where boards, CEOs, CISOs struggle to figure out how they're going to defend their organisations. PricewaterhouseCoopers have seen that the growth of incidents is compounded 66% year on year. As you can see, we're getting into huge numbers and showing no signs of slowing down. In fact, the 14 to 15 should be an even bigger increase than the previous year. We can see that growth between 2013 and 2014 alone was greater than the combined previous few years. As we look at today's threat environment, we recognise that there are a class of threats that will be conclusively recognised at runtime, and as such, these can be prevented at the host and perimeter. These are threats that we know about that can be stopped quickly using traditional kind of AV firewall perimeter methods. But the reality is that many threats require a broader view to recognise. Emerge over time or get lost in the noise. And these are threats that are causing most damage to corporates and governments today. Analytics is how we get to these threats. So analytics, we can detect this class of threats. Only the big data approach can realise. We can also use that data and that intelligence to effectively separate the signal from the noise. So we can get these threats in front of the right team, the right people, at the right time, so they can use their own time wisely. We also provide the intelligence required to optimally enable the incident response team in the process to make sure it's well orchestrated, and that the teams have access to data so they can respond quickly. There are many that say prevention is futile. You can't stop data breaches or high impact cyber incidents. Prevention itself doesn't actually work. We would agree with that. I think what we're talking about here is kind of a prevention-centric strategy. So this is the more traditional strategy of putting all resources, all time and effort into the perimeter, into detecting things on the endpoint using more traditional methods, but not necessarily considering what happens if a breach does occur, less of an ability to respond if that particular scenario does happen. Gartner have gone as far as to say that advanced targeted attacks make prevention-centric strategies obsolete. Securing enterprises in 2020 will require a shift to information and people-centric security strategies, combined with pervasive monitoring and sharing of security intelligence. They project that by 2020, 60% of enterprise information security budgets will be allocated for rapid detection and response approaches, up from less than 10% in 2013. So what we're talking about here is really a shift in mentality within organisations of how we should protect the business moving forward. We need to move away from those more traditional, heavy prevention-centric approaches, relying on those traditional methods, the antivirus, the firewalls, the kind of host-based intrusion, the host-based detection routines, and trusting those to be 100% effective. And moving more to kind of a balanced approach, bringing the kind of detect and response capabilities, really kind of accepting the fact that it's much more difficult, or almost impossible actually, to prevent the infection in the first place. So we need to be realistic about what we do once an infection or an attack has perhaps breached those perimeter protective capabilities. At LogRhythm, we believe a security intelligence approach is absolutely required today. This is due to the fact that the cost of mitigating a threat and risk to the business rises exponentially across the life cycle of a threat, from the initial stages of its inception to its kind of attaining its mission or removal of IP, whatever that might particularly be. The way a threat typically operates is firstly through reconnaissance, looking for a vector into an organisation, perhaps through a user, through a particular endpoint, or using spear phishing or targeted email to go after a high-value target within that organisation. We're then going to see an initial compromise of a host, perhaps, so that the infection or the team behind the infection have a foothold within the organisation itself and within the environment. From there, attempted connection to command and control infrastructure or sites. So, the malware has an ability to come back into the organisation at a later point in time, at choice, remotely and silently. It's going to move laterally throughout the environment, accessing other hosts, compromising other user accounts, expanding that initial footprint until eventually it finds its target and the mission can be realised. The exfiltration of data, corruption of data, or disruption to the organisation can also be, in some cases, kind of national infrastructure can be a target of this as well. And the point here really is to kill the threat early, to let a threat go no further than perhaps that initial compromise or even the constant stage. This is really kind of the art of true detection, and where security intelligence is critically important to recognise a threat that's compromised environment and do so across the holistic attack surface. What we're kind of really talking about here is the kind of three main building blocks of the attack surface that a malware writer or a team behind it might be looking to attack there. So it's really the network, the endpoint, and the user. And an organisation needs to focus on all three of these. We need to detect against zero-day remote exploit, targeting a web server, or spear phishing campaign that might result in a compromised endpoint, and also kind of brings the user into it as well. Well, that particular user has had their credentials stolen. In a large chunk of cases, user credentials are stolen without any real technical compromise of the system. Weak user accounts, well-known user accounts on kind of public-facing services, for example, can be a very easy way to get into this kind of organisation. These are all really avenues of attack of an advanced persistent threat, an APT, or a motivated adversary, which is really what an APT is. Definition of APT really comes down to who's controlling that in the background and what their motives are, and how tenacious they are and how prepared they are to target a particular organisation and how much information they have around it. An organisation needs to be focused against that holistic attack surface, because threats will get through any of these vectors. And they need to be covered. It isn't simply a case of protecting an endpoint, particularly a case of protecting areas of the network or even the whole network. Quite often, as you're probably aware, the user is the weak point in these kind of three different ways of getting into the organisation. So when we talk to the market today, we talk to customers in the broader market, we talk around two key operational metrics that companies need to pay very close attention to. The first is the mean time to detect, and that's the organisation's capability, how fast, how quickly they can determine whether or not there is a threat that can potentially bring harm to the organisation. The second metric really is the mean time to respond. And that's the time it takes to once the threat's been determined, to investigate it, determine how severe it is, and what you can do to mitigate, to respond to that threat. The metrics for these organisations are kind of measured in time. So from the worst affecting, most high impact, kind of measured in weeks, months, perhaps years there, to something that's been avoided, and that typically comes down to determining you've been attacked very quickly and being able to respond to that very quickly as well. The Verizon data breach report mentions that a figure of about 200 or more days on average is how long it takes for an organisation to actually detect that they've been breached, and clearly that's inadequate. 200 days. A targeted APT malware writing team can do an awful lot of damage in that time, take a lot of IP off the network before perhaps an organisation is even aware that anything has happened. So our goal is to use security intelligence to reduce those metrics to days, hours, ideally even minutes and seconds, so the impact for a breach can move from kind of devastating here on the left-hand side across to avoidance or being avoided on the right. We believe really the only approach to this is reducing the risk of a cyber incident, increasing the ability to respond, increasing the time it takes to respond and detect those threats. So the metrics are measured across what we call the threat lifecycle management, which is end-to-end detection workflow. For when a threat engages in an environment, it will be evident in forensic data, whether a security event, data kind of information has been captured from existing security devices, captured the log information, machine data, or generated forensic sensor data. When a threat engages, there will be evidence in the environment, and the question really is, can you see it? That introduces kind of the first stage of this workflow. Moving on to that, it's discovery. So there are really kind of two methods here for discovery. User analytics, things that can be done by people manually, so report generation, ability to check dashboards, find information, searching through forensic data. But it doesn't scale very efficiently. In large organisations, manually looking through this data, trawling this data is very difficult. So the second, where we think as LogRhythm the focus should be, is machine-based analytics. So analysis done in software, done in real time. It's automated, it's tireless, and it leverages correlated information from the entire organisation. It looks at scenario analysis. We can use blacklisting, whitelisting, behavioural non-root detection, machine learning to actually look at all this data and kind of surface and bubble up threats that an advanced analyst would take a long time to pick up there. The next step really is to qualify, to determine quickly whether the incident is going to do us harm. A security operation centre, for example, is be looking at these alarms, but how quickly can analysts get to an alarm, how quickly can they be made aware, and how quickly can they determine whether the alarm is pertinent, whether it's actually a threat, and is it going to bring the organisation harm. So it's kind of critically important that this process can be efficiently managed. So these first three steps are the time to detect. So now we move on to time to respond. So the first one of these is investigate. So investigating the threat, really understanding and qualifying and see how severe it is, and moving on to mitigation. So implementing controls that kind of eliminate the risk from the environment. And that's how I measure time to respond, the second of those two metrics in the earlier slide. Lastly, the final step here is recovery. So eradicating the threat and adapting the environment so you do better next time. So the next time an alarm is popped up and it is seen to be a threat, how can we make sure that doesn't impact in such a severe manner as it did the previous time? We don't typically measure this. It can take a long time. Recovery is the kind of clean-up process afterwards. So we're really sort of concentrating on reducing the time to detect and time to respond. But what is unique about LogRhythm is really the platform takes this whole workflow end-to-end with a kind of purpose-built approach to deliver all these building blocks, so customers can kind of build a workflow around this to kind of bring down these two numbers. And that's really our mission and kind of where we focus. So moving on from the kind of threat landscape, we'll look at the our security intelligence maturity model. So how to grade, how to assess the organisation to see kind of how or where on that graph of impact and risk the organisation might sit, and how you can kind of look at the details of that. So why did we build a maturity model, and why is this kind of useful to organisations? So the increasing rate and sophistication of cyber threats, as we've mentioned. I think awareness of the severity of these cyber threats is certainly increasing a great deal, and I think the finance industry is one of the kind of certainly the leaders in at least being aware of these threats and how impactful they might be. So I think a fundamental shift is happening, as we mentioned some of those Gartner reports, the movement across from the kind of prevention-centric approach to the more pragmatic approach of really trying to deal with those breaches if they do occur. It is kind of happening within enterprise, I think. That said, security monitoring, security intelligence, and security intelligence is something we do talk about a lot, aren't necessarily that well defined. It is something that is quite difficult to describe in detail in kind of a solid fashion. So I think the maturity model really helps us define those levels of security intelligence and how they affect the organisation. So that helps us with a roadmap, how you can improve the security posture of an organisation, I think. So a couple of things just to check here. So organisational risk characteristics, how they can be graded against an organisation. So the way we do our security intelligence model is this kind of level 0 through to level 4, and the different risk characteristics on the left here inform how far on this kind of journey that you might be. So some of the typical ones like compliance risk that we can talk about later as well. But really, insider threat risk is one of the key ones, I think. So insider threat being internal users and their ability to damage the organisation. External threat risk and advanced persistent threats we've kind of talked about in the threat landscape side of things. So an organisation being targeted by an APT team, perhaps, specifically for use within that organisation, or specifically to gain IP that organisation has. And then the highest level and the hardest to defend against is nation-state threat risk, which is a legitimate, real threat in certain circumstances. It's nation-state-sponsored malware and APT attacks, essentially. So this kind of maps across to security intelligence investments and the capabilities they provide. So obviously the SIM platform towards the top here, log management being part of that, the forensics that we bring, so server and endpoint forensics, the network forensics side of things, so deep packet analysis, application analysis on the network, hugely important for the high levels of the SIM kind of assessment model there. And then things like threat intelligence and vulnerability intelligence as well. That's along the lines of just really minimising the footprint in terms of attack in an organisation. And lastly, the very kind of highest level typically is the monitoring the response process and the SOC, the Security Operations Centre, and how that is able to look at the wider organisation, provide kind of quick a response and a quick alerting and response to the rest of the organisation. So just to briefly go through these levels, as we've mentioned on the previous two slides. So level 0 really is what we consider to be kind of blind, so no ability to leverage security intelligence, a very long time in terms of mean time to detect and mean time to respond, very manual process, very open compliance risk, really blind to any types of threats here. And if they have an organisation that kind of at this level has IP that is of interest to external bad actors, then there's a good chance that that's actually already been sort of compromised to some extent, taken out of the organisation. Level 1 starts to improve this kind of capability, so we may have at this point a kind of basic SIM installation. We may have some basic compliance requirements met. Quite often an organisation at this level will have really the kind of tick box level compliance installation. So this will really be, to some extent compliant, but really not utilising that to its fullest extent. Compliance types that help increase the security and the resilience of an organisation really are there for a good reason. So meeting all of those can really kind of improve this. But an organisation at this level still has a mean time to detect in the kind of weeks to month time scale. So still a very long time before really becoming aware of high-level threats. Really blind to the advanced persistent threats and most inside and external threats there as well. So really kind of minimally compliant. Increasing from here, so level 2, we're really starting to improve things quite a lot between the two levels here. So mean time detectors is kind of lowering into the hours in the day kind of period. Similarly with mean time to respond, we may start to have some targeted machine analytics. We might have log management across the wider organisation as well. Really, an organisation at this level has kind of recognised that they were previously blind to certain threats and really has had to target specific areas of the network and gone beyond that typical kind of checkbox level of compliance, really kind of increase the resilience a great deal. So perhaps now seeing insider threats, seeing most of the external threats as well, but really a targeted, advanced, persistent threat with a team behind it is likely to get what they want from this organisation. They're probably still going to successfully attack it. They're probably going to be taking IP off this network if we're what we'd consider to be kind of level 2. Level 3, moving on from here, we're really starting to become a lot more resilient. So we're saying this is the vigilant level. So mean time to detect and response is now measured in hours. This is really where you have, to some extent, a functional security operations center there, looking at this kind of information, looking at the output from forensic tools and the SIM platform, and really starting to look at targeted orchestration and automated response. So kind of a machine response, perhaps, to threats rather than just a manual one. That's what's really bringing the time down in terms of the time to detect, and really the time to respond is kind of greatly reduced there. I think an organisation at this level really is kind of actively trying to pen test the organisation quite regularly, really aware of the typical ways in, aware of their organisation in terms of how it sits for the IP that it may have, and far more likely to resist an APT attack if it was targeted at this organisation. Of course, perhaps still vulnerable to nation-state attacks. That's a very hard one to defend against. So there's a good chance that something at the very highest level is still going to have some way into this kind of organisation. So that really moves on to the final level, level 4, the highest level in our security intelligence maturity model, where the mean time to detect and mean time to respond is really brought down into kind of minutes and seconds region. That requires, this is kind of advanced, perhaps 24/7 SOC, really has proactive threat intelligence, proactive vulnerability intelligence, full kind of automated response to alerts bubbled up from the kind of system in the organisation there. It really will be extremely resilient to even directed attacks. So this is really the ideal kind of gold standard for the SIM, and something to kind of go for and target towards. So we can see how this kind of maps across to our earlier graph. So reducing the mean time to detect and respond goes from the kind of level 0 here on the left-hand side, where those two metrics are measured in the months and then perhaps even the year period, across the very highest level, level 4, where this response time is brought down greatly. And this system of self-assessing and grading organisation really does give you a good idea in terms of workflow and how to improve the security posture of the organisation. It's something we can talk to any organisation about and help you through with interest is certainly there. So how does our product suite really help with that? So we mentioned about forensics, we mentioned about log management, and really this is where we come into play. So the LogRhythm product suite really provides kind of that full spectrum visibility, the ability to read information from all existing log sources on the organisation, generate our own forensic data as well, so be it network forensics, the servers and also the endpoints. And holistic analytics is really the ability to bring all of those together and kind of process that in one place. So hopefully that kind of shows how we can deliver security intelligence, bubble up unseen threats that wouldn't have been seen by individual point sources, an ability to kind of prioritise those and show those to the relevant people quickly, and allows the incident responders to use that information, respond to it as quickly as possible, and lower those two metrics we've been talking about. And that's really where the end-to-end threat lifecycle management comes into play. So LogRhythm's mission, so our security intelligence mission really, as we mentioned, reduce the time to detect and respond using our platform, detect more advanced threats, so the APT attacks, the nation-state sponsored attacks, the correlated events, and the kind of attacks that aren't just malware on a machine, they're also targeted attacks against specific users. They are the perimeter, they are the internal side of things, they're looking for specific IP, so the more advanced correlated threats that require visibility into the whole network is really what we can help. The ability to prioritize these, you know, a large organisation with a lot of log source information coming in can very easily be swamped with alerts. So the ability for us to provide those kind of prioritised threats for the SOC team, for the analysis team to look at is really the key kind of metric, or the key the value there. You only want to be able to see the really pertinent threats, the correlated alarms, rather than just all the basic information. Centralised visibility and analytics there, so our kind of ability to create these very advanced dashboards and analytics around those. So it goes back to our kind of our correlated threat side of things. Instant response automation orchestration, so functionality like our smart response allows automated response to alerts that have been doubled up. So if there's something that requires a very quick response, something that's quite difficult to do without a lot of scripting, our smart response capability allows that to happen automatically or with levels of approval, so it can be an automated process. And that's really what brings the time down in terms of responding to these threats. And compliance automation assurance, so the compliance types and functionality built into the platform to really speed up the time it takes to become compliant and automate that with a kind of response, report, investigation, and list abilities as well. And ultimately, from a security perspective, breach prevention. So make sure an organisation is better protected from threats, more aware of them, and lowering overall risk. And that's all kind of a part of our main mission, you know, primarily protecting organisations from these more advanced threats. So as you may have seen, we're sort of demonstrated leader in the Magic Quadrant for Gartner, independently verified in SC Magazine, Frost & Sullivan, etc. as well. Certainly already in finance customers currently using us for exactly what we've been mentioning. Similarly with many insurance customers as well, currently using the LogRhythm platform to bring down this mean time to detect and respond. So just briefly wanted to show you some information around something called Dridex, which is a variant of Zeus kind of malware. So it's finance-specific malware that has some quite specific behaviour around it. So this kind of demonstrates really, we'll be showing how this is picked up, but a kind of malware that really targets not only the endpoints but also the users. So a typical spear phishing email might be received by somebody in the organisation, perhaps someone at a high level, and actually uses social engineering to try and get a user to re-enable macros in Office, something that's been disabled for a long time, to make it easier for that infection to take hold, essentially. And one of the key points here is that this particular variant of use now waits for closure of documentation. So it can't very easily be sandboxed, rather than it being a period of time or at the start of this period. Then this is actually waiting for the closure of a document before actually kicking off any particular infected malware there. And once that has got beyond the point of closure and the malware has started, we're at the point where we're stealing credentials, beaconing out, and essentially stealing money. So a finance-specific variant of Zeus, very new, very difficult to detect because of the kind of anti-sandboxing capabilities that it has. So we created this for a customer very briefly, just to show our ability to pick this kind of advanced malware up using our own security intelligence. So very quickly created a rule that checks for closure of specific types of infectable documentation. Looking for a non-whitelist, this goes back to our ability to whitelist what's running on the machine, and optionally check for the beaconing out to known bad hosts as well. So very quick to create. This was a couple-of-minute job to kind of create an alarm rule within our organisation. It doesn't rely upon fresh signatures from AV, doesn't rely upon perimeter detection or sandboxing to actually pick this up. Very easily detected within our platform and very easy to create that. And just lastly, so Financial Conduct Authority has published a series of documentation, two main documents around financial crime, a guide for firms. So this has been published and is available can send out the actual FCA documentation out after this particular presentation. But we, as LogRhythm, have also created a matching white paper, specifically mapped against the requirements of this particular documentation from the FCA. So it kind of demonstrates how aware we are of these kind of finance-specific threats and requirements for organisation as well. And certainly this can be sent out after the presentation to anyone who would like it. Similarly, any demos, any particular information required from us at LogRhythm to kind of show you how this we can really help you with security posture and with compliance. Very happy to set those up as well. So any questions? I think hopefully Shane is still in the background there.
Yes, I am. Whether people can hear me or not may be questionable. It seems I have some.
I certainly can. I can.
I'll just give a few seconds for that. While I'm waiting, just so hopefully you can all still hear me. Apologies for. Don't have any questions coming through at the moment, so thank you very much, Adam, for your time and your presentation this morning.